watching All 24 News World News program broadcasting to you live from the capital. Cheers to the headlines. U.S. envoy says Phase 2 of Gaza ceasefire begins, focusing on a new transitional government and the Palestinian groups back the plan. Also in our news, tensions rise as Iran warns it could hit U.S. bases if attacked. Washington urges citizens to leave, and Russia says no one can change ties with Iran. Spanish rights group vows legal action after Morocco blocks entry to Western Sahara, sparking Sahrawi condemnation of isolation tactics by Morocco. In Ukraine, Zelensky calls for broader mobilization reforms. Reports emerge over talks between Witkoff, Kushner and Putin, while Russia signals openness to serious negotiations. The details right up. Welcome back to the program. First off in our news tonight, U.S. President Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, says Washington has launched the second phase of its plan to end the war on Gaza. Writing on X platform, Witkoff says the United States expects Hamas to fully meet its commitments, including the return of the body of the last deceased prisoner, warning that failure to do so would bring serious consequences. The new phase includes setting up a technocratic Palestinian administration in Gaza, starting a disarmament process and moving toward the full reconstruction of the Strip.
Today, we announced the start of the second phase of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza, and we expect Hamas to fully abide by its commitments under the agreement. The second phase includes the establishment of a transitional Palestinian administration, the start of disarmament, and the complete reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. We expect Hamas to return the remains of the last Israeli hostages, and failure to do so will have serious consequences.
A senior Hamas delegation led by Khalil al-Hayya has arrived in Cairo for talks with Egyptian officials on moving forward with the ceasefire. Hamas says the discussions will focus on completing the first phase, including opening the Rafah crossing in both directions, and accelerating the second phase, covering the formation of an administrative committee and the full withdrawal of Zionist occupation forces from the Gaza Strip. Palestinian factions say they fully support mediators' efforts to form a transitional national committee to run the Gaza Strip. In a joint statement, the factions urged the Peace Council, working with the mediators, to press the Israeli occupation to stop its aggression and open up the crossings. They also reaffirmed their commitment to unifying Palestinian positions to navigate the current critical phase. On the ground, Zionist occupation forces killed 2 Palestinians in Gaza on Wednesday. A nurse near Khan Yunis and a man in Jabalia had been wounded days earlier. The strikes come as the occupation airstrikes and shelling continued across the Strip. Gaza's health ministry reports 15 bodies were brought to hospitals in the past 24 hours, including 2 killed on Wednesday and 13 recovered from rubble. The ministry also notes a separate grim tally. At least 25 Palestinians have now been killed this winter due to buildings collapsing from storm damage and prior war damage. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has threatened to take the Israeli occupation to the International Court of Justice if it continues to target the UN's Palestinian aid agency, UNRWA. In a January 8 letter to Benjamin Netanyahu, Guterres stated the UN will not stay silent over actions that violate international law. He demanded the Zionist occupation immediately reverse its measures and return all seized UNRWA assets and property. UNRWA has condemned the closure of one of its health centers in East Al-Quds by Zionist occupation forces, calling it a blatant violation of international law. Commissioner General Philip Lazzarini said on X platform that the center has been shut for 30 days, denying Palestinian refugees access to essential health care. Still with the Middle East developments in Syria, the military sources say their forces clashed overnight with the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces east of Aleppo. State media reports the SDF targeted civilian homes and army positions using drones and heavy weapons, prompting a return of fire. For its part, the SDF claims it repelled an attempted infiltration by pro-government factions on a separate front, forcing them to retreat under drone and machine gun fire. An Iranian official tells Reuters that Tehran has warned U.S. allies their hosting of American bases makes them targets if Washington attacks Iran. The senior official said Iran has urged countries, including Saudi Arabia and Turkey, to prevent any U.S. strikes. Iran's defense minister separately stated the country is on higher alert than during its last war and vowed a forceful response to any attack on its territory. Iran's Revolutionary Guard commander Majid Musavi says the country has increased its missile stockpiles since last year's war with the Zionist entity. State media reports Musavi confirmed his forces are at peak readiness, with all damage from the 2025 conflict fully repaired. The U.S. is urging its citizens in Iran to leave immediately. The virtual embassy in Tehran advised Americans on Tuesday evening to consider traveling by land to Turkey or Armenia if it's safe, without giving further details. Iran's Armed Force Chief of Staff Abdurrahim Musavi says trained terrorist groups carried out recent violent attacks across the country. In remarks Wednesday, Musavi stated the scale of the recent devastating sabotage is unprecedented for Iran. He added these groups operated by directing or directly targeting civilians with gunfire, prioritizing killings and worsening the security situation. Iran's UN mission is calling on the Security Council and Secretary General to condemn U.S. interference in its internal affairs. Iranian media reports the mission demanded the UN fulfill its charter obligations by condemning what it calls U.S. incitement to violence, threats of force, and meddling in Iran's domestic matters. For its part, China says it opposes any foreign interference in Iran's internal affairs. The statement from Beijing comes after U.S. President Donald Trump warned of very strong measures against Iran. At a briefing Wednesday, Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning said China does not condone the use or threat of force in international relations.
Regarding the situation in Iran, we have stated our position on many occasions. We support and hope that the Iranian government and people can overcome the current difficulties and maintain national stability. At the same time, we oppose external forces interfering in a country's internal affairs and do not approve of the use of threat of force in international relations. We hope that all parties can do more to promote peace and stability in the Middle East.
Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow will continue working with Iran to implement bilateral agreements, insisting no third party can alter their relations. In Moscow on Wednesday, Lavrov added that the United States, by abandoning long-held principles, is harming its own image.
Moscow will continue working with Iran to reach comprehensive bilateral agreements, and what others may do will not change the nature of the relationship between the two countries. What the United States is doing creates a negative impression of itself and confirms its abandonment of principles it has long advocated.
Moving on to a different matter now, a Spanish human rights delegation barred from entering Western Sahara says it will file formal complaints over the incident. Upon returning to Las Palmas, Spanish MP Noemi Perez told Sahrawi media that Moroccan authorities refused to allow the three-member delegation to disembark in Laayoune airport, offering no justification for the move.
Upon our arrival in Western Sahara, we were not allowed to disembark from the plane and were stopped without any justification, even after we requested to do so. We spent nearly 20 minutes trying to get off onto the territory of Western Sahara, but the Moroccan occupation forces prevented us. They did not identify themselves despite our requests. We informed them that among us were representatives of the people in the institutions of the Canary Islands, and that we had come on a mission to monitor respect for international law and human rights, fully aware that these rights are violated daily in that territory, where 35 Sahrawis are detained for political reasons. No explanations were provided to us at any time, and what they did was instruct the aircraft commander on which we had arrived to return to the Canary Islands. We will now, of course, file the necessary complaints in the places where we are able to do so, because we believe that our personal rights have also been violated.
The Spanish parliamentarian vowed that the delegation will return to Western Sahara, reaffirming solidarity with the Sahrawi activists in the occupied territories.
It was a moving and emotionally charged experience. First, because you directly witness how your rights are trampled, even though you were not even able to get off the plane. I can imagine the suffering of all those activists present in the territory because of the consequences of this activism, simply for defending the sovereignty of their land and their resources, which have been seized by the Moroccan occupier. It is unfortunate that we were not able to meet with civil society and Sahrawi activists, but we will certainly return.
On a similar note, an official from Spain's Canary Islands says Morocco is maintaining a media blackout and expelling international missions from Western Sahara. Carmela Ramirez, head of the Spanish Solidarity Federation, told All24 News TV that the blocked delegation aimed to document human rights violations from Morocco's 50-year illegal occupation of the territory.
We conducted this visit to the occupied Sahrawi territories to document the human rights violations perpetrated by illegal occupation of Western Sahara. From the moment we landed on the plane, we learned that Morocco has been occupying this territory by force for 50 years in clear violation of international law. It does not respect the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination and independence and continues to arrest Sahrawi human rights activists. Their number has reached 35 Sahrawis unjustly and arbitrarily detained. Furthermore, the matter has escalated to the plundering and theft of Western Sahara's natural resources, which no one but the Sahrawi people have the right to dispose of.
The Moroccan Democratic Workers' Approach Party slammed the government for pushing dangerous laws, including changes to the electoral law. In a Wednesday statement, the party highlighted the gap between official slogans of social progress and the reality on the ground, citing recent floods in Safi and other cities, building collapses, and the deaths of dozens of citizens. It also criticized the state's neglect of earthquake victims in Al-Haus, residents trapped in by snow in mountainous areas, and the ongoing deterioration of health, education, and public services.
We will not take part in any fabricated electoral process that reproduces the same institutions lacking popular legitimacy conducted under the supervision of the Ministry of Interior within the framework of an imposed constitution, regressive laws, and the continued practice of political repression. This situation reflects a policy of neglect, poor governance, and the scale of entrenched corruption within the machinery of the state at the central, regional, and local levels, alongside the squandering of public funds on large, unproductive projects aimed at polishing appearances. These projects do not benefit the Moroccan people, but rather serve the ruling minority, making it necessary to strengthen mass labor and popular struggle to bring down corruption and authoritarianism.
Algerian Secretary of State for Mines, Karima Bakir Tafar, is attending the 2026 International Mining Conference in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. Algeria's participation aims to promote its mining sector, integrate into global value chains, and boost international cooperation. Darfur also joined the Ministerial Roundtable in Arab Industrial Development, Standardization and Mining Organization meeting to discuss unifying Arab efforts in industry and mining. Moving on to the war in Sudan now. Sudanese joint armed forces say they have successfully cleared the Jarjira area, fully liberating the region. Spokesperson Ali Wakil Abuja said the operation forced rapid support forces to retreat south toward Kalbus in West Darfur. 20 combat vehicles were seized, 15 destroyed, and several enemy personnel captured. The UN has renewed calls for all parties in Sudan to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure immediately. OCHA says ongoing violence is forcing people from their homes, with dozens killed in Darfur and Sennar during RSF offensives. The UN urged respect for international humanitarian law and safe humanitarian access, calling on donors to provide life-saving aid. Looking Eastern Europe now, Russia's defense ministry says its air defenses shot down 48 Ukrainian drones overnight. According to a Wednesday statement, 25 were destroyed over Rostov, 13 over Stavropol, 5 over Bryansk, 3 over Crimea, and 1 each over Belgorod and Kursk. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the situation in Ukraine is worsening after nearly 4 years of war. In Tuesday's address, he reported Russian attacks including 18 ballistic missiles, combat drones, and cruise missiles. Zelensky added that a severe cold wave is worsening civilian suffering, with crews working in sub-zero temperatures to keep the power grid running.
The situation is difficult everywhere at the moment, but it is hardest on the front lines. Taking into account the weather and Russia's efforts to pretend that ending this war does not concern it, attacks continue, and so does the defense of our positions. Ukraine has been in a defensive posture for several months and has recently been forced to withdraw from additional positions in the east and south.
And as you followed in our tonight's headlines, Bloomberg reports that White House envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner may travel to Moscow to meet President Vladimir Putin. The meeting, possibly this month, is still tentative and could be delayed due to the unrest in Iran. The officials are expected to present a new peace proposal, discuss U.S. and European security guarantees, and plans for post-war reconstruction in Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow is open to serious talks on Ukraine that tackle the crisis root causes, warning that last peace is impossible otherwise. At a Wednesday press conference in Moscow, Lavrov criticized some leaders, particularly in Germany and Britain, for focusing only on a short-term 60-day ceasefire, which he says gives Kiev more time.
President Vladimir Putin has reaffirmed on several occasions in recent weeks that Russia's position is based on openness to many negotiations on Ukraine, provided that such talks are serious and that participants put forward proposals with real substance. By contrast, Russian officials point out that some European parties, most notably Germany and the United Kingdom, are focusing on calls for a temporary 60-day ceasefire or even a permanent truce, which Moscow considers to be a non-serious proposal.
To another global news story, U.S. President Donald Trump says the United States needs Greenland for national security. On Truth Social on Wednesday, he called Greenland vital to Washington's Golden Dome and urged NATO to support its acquisition. His remarks came ahead of a Washington meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance, Foreign Minister Marco Rubio, and Danish and Greenlandic officials. For his part, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the future of Greenland is solely for Denmark and its people to decide. Speaking in Brussels Wednesday, von der Leyen affirmed the EU's support for Greenlanders' right to self-determination. She stated the Commission is in close contact with the Danish government and attentive to Greenland's needs, while stressing that NATO's core principle remains collective security.
Only to them to decide on matters that are concerning. Greenland belongs to its people, so it's up to Denmark and Greenland, and only to them, to decide on matters that are concerning Denmark and Greenland. That's point number one. That's very important. We are in constant contact with the Danish government, also to listen to what the needs are, what the needs of the Greenlanders are, in very close contact.
And before we wrap up, here's more international news stories in the News in Brief with Mohammed Khatil.
Next Sunday's presidential election in Portugal is set to require a runoff vote for the first time in 40 years, amid growing political fragmentation, and the race for a place in the second round is still wide open, according to a new opinion poll. Smaller polls in recent days show similarly tight margins among the top 5 contenders for a role that carries powers to dissolve parliament and call snap elections. Presidential vote has gone to a second round only once in Portugal's history, underscoring the impact of rising far-right influence and voter fatigue with mainstream parties. Mark Carney landed in Beijing on Wednesday, marking the first visit to China by a Canadian Prime Minister since 2017. The trip is widely seen as an effort to ease tensions that have strained relations for years, particularly after they worsened in 2024 when former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau mirrored the Biden administration by imposing 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. The visit follows a cordial meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea last October, although no major agreements emerged and Chinese tariffs continued to block Canadian canola from its largest market. The two leaders agreed to work toward improving relations. Xi Jinping extended an invitation for Carney to visit China, which he accepted. A train derailed in northeastern Thailand on Wednesday after a construction crane fell on 2 of its carriages, killing at least 31 people and injuring 64. The crane was working on a high-speed rail project when it collapsed and hit the passing train, causing it to derail and briefly catch fire. Provincial authorities said that rescue workers were preparing to enter the Manglan train carriages to search for more bodies that may have been trapped inside. Bulgarian villages, dressed in colorful costumes, chase away evil spirits, using rituals involving fires and the ringing of bells on their costumes. The traditional and carnival procession and dance aim to chase away the winter spirits and bring in good health and a harvest for the new year. The dancers are known as survakars, or cookers, and some wear handmade wooden masks decorated with feathers, which can be up to 2 meters high.
And that brings us to the end of our news program. To catch up on any part you missed or get the latest updates, you can always visit our social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, X, and Instagram. On behalf of all 24 News team, I'm Islam Said. Thank you for tuning in. Take care.